The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its contents so outrageous that Michael Harrison nearly choked on his coffee. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association was demanding $50,000 in back fees, threatening foreclosure on his property, and claiming he'd been illegally operating outside their jurisdiction for 3 years. There was just one problem. Michael had never joined their HOA, and what they didn't know would soon turn their perfect suburban kingdom upside down. Michael Harrison had always been a quiet man who preferred his privacy. At 52, the retired software engineer had purchased his dream property on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a modest 3-bedroom house on 2 acres of wooded land that backed up to a small lake. What drew him to the property wasn't just its natural beauty, but its strategic location, technically within city limits, yet far enough from the main subdivision to avoid the drama of neighborhood politics. For 3 peaceful years, Michael had lived his ideal life. He maintained his property meticulously, kept to himself, and enjoyed the solitude that came with being the only non-horror resident in the area. His neighbors seemed pleasant enough during their brief encounters, though he noticed they kept their distance. He assumed it was simply respect for his obvious preference for privacy. That assumption shattered the morning Patricia Whitmore appeared at his door. Patricia was the type of woman who commanded attention without asking for it. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothing that screamed suburban authority, and eyes that could freeze hell itself. As the self-appointed president of the Willow Creek HOA, she had built her reputation on maintaining community standards with the precision of a military operation. Mr. Harrison, Patricia announced, not waiting for an invitation to speak, we need to discuss your situation. Michael studied the woman standing on his porch, noting the way she held herself like someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm sorry, what situation would that be? Your illegal operation outside HOA jurisdiction, Patricia replied, her voice dripping with barely contained satisfaction. You see, Michael, may I call you Michael? Your property may have been grandfathered in when you purchased it, but recent city ordinance changes have brought you under our umbrella. You're now subject to Willow Creek HOA regulations, including 3 years of back fees. The conversation that followed was like watching a chess master play against someone who didn't even know the rule. East had changed. Patricia presented her case with the confidence of someone who had done this before. City records showing boundary adjustments, legal precedents for retroactive HOA inclusion, and a meticulously prepared invoice for $50. Zero in fees, fines, and compliance adjustments. Your property has been in violation of 17 different community standards, Patricia continued, consulting her tablet with theatrical precision. Unapproved tree removal, non-compliant mailbox design, unauthorized water feature construction, and failure to maintain lawn height specifications. Each violation carries a $500 monthly fine, compounded over 3 years. Michael listened in stunned silence as Patricia itemized his supposed infractions. The unauthorized water feature was a small pond he'd restored that had existed on the property for decades. The non-compliant mailbox was a craftsman-style wooden post his grandfather had built in the 1960s. The unapproved tree removal referred to a dead oak he'd safely removed after it was struck by Lightning, this is insane. Michael finally managed. I never agreed to join your HOA. I specifically bought this property because it was outside HOA jurisdiction. Patricia's smile was razor sharp. That was then. Michael, this is now. The law is on our side, and frankly, your continued resistance will only make this more expensive for everyone involved. She handed him a thick manila envelope. You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance and settle your outstanding fees. After that, we'll have no choice but to pursue foreclosure proceedings. The word foreclosure hit Michael like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or property maintenance. Patricia was threatening to take his home. Over the following weeks, Michael discovered the true scope of Patricia's campaign. She had systematically targeted every non-HOA property owner in the expanding Willow Creek area, using up scarcity ordinances and legal technicalities to force compliance. Most had simply paid up rather than fight. Those who resisted found themselves buried under an avalanche of legal paperwork and mounting fines. Michael spent sleepless nights researching property law, HOA regulations, and city ordinances. He contacted 3 different attorneys, each of whom gave him the same grim assessment. Patricia's legal strategy was aggressive, but technically sound. Fighting it would cost more than simply paying the fees. But Michael Harrison hadn't become a successful software engineer by accepting defeat easily. As he dug deeper into the case, he began to notice something interesting about Patricia's operation. The HOA meetings were always held at the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, a beautiful facility that served as the crown jewel of the subdivision. According to public records, the HOA had been renting the space for their meetings and events for over 5 years, paying substantial monthly fees to an LLC called Harrison Properties. The name should have been a clue. Michael's research led him down a rabbit hole of property records, corporate filings, and inheritance documents. What he discovered made him smile for the first time in weeks. His late father, whom he'd barely known, had been far more successful in real estate than Michael had ever realized. The portfolio of properties he'd inherited and largely ignored included several commercial buildings, rental properties, and one very special asset, the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse. Patricia Whitmore, in her relentless quest to control every aspect of the neighborhood, had been paying rent to the very man she was trying to destroy. But Michael kept this information to himself. If Patricia wanted to play legal hardball, he would show her what a real game looked like. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, marked final notice. Patricia had made good on her threat, filing for emergency foreclosure proceedings, and claiming Michael had ignored all attempts at resolution. The letter demanded immediate payment of $73,000, the original fees plus additional penalties and legal costs. As Michael read the threatening legal language, his phone rang. It was Patricia herself. "Michael, I really hate that it's come to this," she said, her voice carrying full sympathy. "But you've left us no choice. The foreclosure hearing is scheduled for next Friday. You can still avoid this unpleasantness by settling your account before then." "Patricia," Michael replied calmly, "I think you should know that I've decided to fight this." There was a pause on the line. "Michael, you're making a terrible mistake. I have the law on my side, the community behind me, and frankly, more resources than you could ever imagine. This will not end well for you. We'll see about that, Michael said, and hung up the phone. Patricia stared at her phone in disbelief. In 5 years of aggressive HOA enforcement, no one had ever challenged her this directly. Most property owners crumbled under the pressure, paid their fees, and fell in line. Michael Harrison was about to learn why. What Patricia didn't know was that her perfect suburban kingdom was built on a foundation of sand, and the man she'd chosen as her enemy held the deed to her empire's most important asset. The battle for Willow Creek was about to begin, and only one of them would be left standing when the dust settled. The foreclosure hearing was set for the following Friday at 9 a.m. Michael Harrison had 7 days to prepare for the fight of his life. Michael Harrison had never felt smaller than he did walking into the law offices of Brennan and Associates. The mahogany-paneled waiting room reeked of old money and established power. Exactly the kind of place that would normally intimidate him into submission. But desperation had a way of making cowards brave, and Michael was running out of options. Attorney Sarah Brennan was younger than Michael had expected, perhaps 35, with sharp eyes and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. She listened intently as Michael explained his situation, occasionally taking notes, but never interrupting. Mr. Harrison, she said finally, Patricia Whitmore has been using this same strategy across 3 counties. She identifies properties that she can technically bring under HOA jurisdiction through obscure ordinances, then buries the owners in fees and legal costs until they either pay up or lose their homes. How is that legal? Michael asked. It exists in a gray area of property law, Sarah explained. The courts generally favor HOA authority in boundary disputes, especially when the HOA can demonstrate community benefit. Patricia has been very careful to stay just inside the legal lines. Michael's heart sank. So I'm going to lose my house. Not necessarily, Sarah said, leaning forward. You mentioned that you inherited some properties from your father. Have you thoroughly investigated what exactly you own? That evening, Michael spread every document from his father's estate across his dining room table. Robert Harrison had been a secretive man who'd built a small real estate empire while living like a humble retiree. As Michael worked through the papers, he began to understand the scope of his inheritance. Harrison Properties, LLC owned 14 commercial buildings, 6 residential rental properties, and several parcels of undeveloped land throughout the county. But it was the folder marked Willow Creek Holdings that made Michael's pulse quicken. His father had purchased the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse in 1998, along with the adjacent tennis courts and community pool. The property had been leased to the Willow Creek HOA under a long-term rental agreement that was set to expire in 18 months. The monthly rental income alone was $12,000, meaning Patricia's HOA had been paying Michael's family over $700,000 in rent over the past 5 years. Michael called Sarah immediately. This changes everything, she said, after reviewing the documents. Patricia doesn't just rent meeting space from you. Her entire HOA operation depends on your property. The clubhouse is where they hold elections, conduct business, and host the community events that justify their authority. Can we use this somehow, Michael? You don't just own the building where Patricia holds court. You own her kingdom. The next morning, Michael decided to see his property with new eyes. He drove to the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, a beautiful, Mediterranean-style building nestled among mature oak trees. The facility was impressive. A main hall that could seat 200 people, commercial kitchen, conference rooms, and office space that Patricia had converted into her HOA command center. As he walked around the building, Michael noticed security cameras mounted at every entrance. On impulse, he called the security company listed on the small stickers near each camera, Harrison Properties account. The dispatcher confirmed. Would you like to review recent footage, Mr. Harrison? Michael's father, paranoid about property damage and liability, had installed a comprehensive security system that recorded everything. The footage was stored digitally and accessible online. Michael spent the next several hours watching Patricia's operation from the inside. What he saw was disturbing. Patricia didn't just use the clubhouse for legitimate HOA business. She conducted what appeared to be private meetings with city council members, held strategy sessions for targeting non-compliant property owners, and most damning of all, she had converted one of the conference rooms into a personal office where she managed several other HOA enforcement operations across the county. In one particularly revealing recording from 3 weeks earlier, Patricia was clearly heard saying, "The Harrison property will be the biggest score yet. Once we force foreclosure, we can flip it to one of our preferred developers for triple what he owes in fees." Michael felt sick. This wasn't about community standards or property values. Patricia was running a sophisticated real estate scam, using her authority to steal properties and resell them for profit. But the most shocking discovery came from footage recorded just 2 days after Patricia's visit to his home. She had held a private meeting with 3 men Michael didn't recognize, spreading blueprints across the conference table. The documents were too small to read clearly, but Michael could make out what appeared to be development plans for his property. Sarah Brennan's reaction was immediate and intense. "Patricia isn't just trying to collect fees from you, Michael. She's planning to steal your property and develop it. This is criminal conspiracy. Can we stop the foreclosure?" "We can do better than that," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming. "We can destroy her entire operation." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than fighting Patricia's foreclosure action directly, they would use Michael's position as her landlord to expose the entire scheme. Sarah filed a motion to inspect the clubhouse property, citing concerns about unauthorized commercial use and potential lease violations. Patricia's response was swift and predictable. She immediately scheduled an emergency HOA meeting to discuss harassment by non-resident property owners and began mobilizing her supporters to attend the foreclosure hearing. But Michael had an advantage Patricia couldn't have anticipated. As the building owner, he had legitimate access to all areas of the clubhouse, including Patricia's converted office space. What he found there exceeded his wildest expectations. Patricia had been sloppy in her confidence, file cabinets full of correspondence with city officials, detailed financial records showing kickbacks from developers, and most damning of all, a master list of targeted properties with notes about acquisition strategies and profit projections. The Harrison property was just one of 37 homes Patricia planned to seize over the next 2 years. Sarah immediately contacted the district attorney's office. The evidence of systematic fraud was overwhelming, but they needed to move carefully. If Patricia suspected she was under investigation, she might destroy evidence or flee. We need to let the foreclosure hearing proceed as planned, Sarah explained. If we tip our hand early, she'll know we're onto her. But we're going to prepare a surprise that will end this once and for all. 3 days before the hearing, Michael received an unexpected visitor. Patricia arrived at his door with 2 large men in expensive suits, both of whom looked like they'd be more comfortable collecting debts than discussing property law. "Michael," Patricia said, her voice carrying a new edge, "I wanted to give you one final opportunity to resolve this matter amicably. I thought we were past negotiations," Michael replied, noting how the 2 men positioned themselves to block his retreat into the house. "Recent circumstances have made me reconsider," Patricia said. "I'm prepared to reduce your total obligation to $25,000, payable immediately. In return, you'll join the HOA voluntarily and agree to all current and future community standards." Michael studied Patricia's face, seeing something he hadn't noticed before: desperation. "And if I refuse?" One of the large men stepped closer. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Whitmore is trying to help you here. Some people in this situation, well, they've found that fighting the community can lead to all sorts of unpleasant complications." The threat was clear, and Michael felt a chill of real fear. But he also recognized opportunity. Patricia was making mistakes, getting sloppy, and revealing the true nature of her operation. "I'll need time to consider your offer," Michael said carefully. "You have until tomorrow at noon," Patricia replied. "After that, we proceed with the foreclosure. And believe me, Michael, that will be far more expensive for everyone involved." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He walked through his house, looking at the life he'd built, knowing it could all be gone in 48 hours. But he also thought about the other 36 families on Patricia's target list, people who would lose their homes to her scheme if he didn't find the courage to fight. He called Sarah at 6 a.m. "I'm not backing down," he told her. "Whatever it takes, we end this at the hearing. Michael, you need to understand what you're risking. If our strategy fails, you'll lose everything. Patricia has resources, connections, and a legal team that's been winning these cases for years. Then we better make sure we don't fail," Michael said. The foreclosure hearing was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. Michael Harrison had less than 36 hours to prepare for the fight that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of Patricia Whitmore's entire criminal empire. As he looked out at the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse in the distance, Michael smiled for the first time in weeks. Patricia Whitmore had no idea that she'd been paying rent to her own executioner. The Hamilton County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice as Michael Harrison walked through its marble halls, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Courtroom 3B was already filling with spectators when he arrived at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before his scheduled financial execution. Patricia Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table surrounded by 3 attorneys in $1,000 suits, her confidence radiating across the room like heat from a furnace. She had dressed for victory in a Navy power suit and pearls, her blonde hair swept back in a style that screamed authority. When she noticed Michael entering with only Sarah Brennan beside him, her smile was predatory. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Chen," the bailiff announced. Judge Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, known throughout the county for her impatience with frivolous litigation and her sharp legal mind. She reviewed the case file briefly before looking up at both parties. "This is a foreclosure action brought by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association against Mr. Michael Harrison for unpaid fees and violations totaling $73.00. Judge Chen announced. "Ms. Patterson, you may proceed." Patricia's lead attorney, Jenna Patterson, was a formidable woman who had built her career on HOA enforcement cases. She approached the bench with the confidence of someone who had never lost this type of case. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of property law and community standards," Patterson began. Mr. Harrison's property was legally brought under HOA jurisdiction through proper city ordinance Proc. Edgars. He has willfully ignored all attempts at compliance and now, with substantial fees and penalties, Patterson presented her case with surgical precision. City records showing boundary adjustments, documentation of property violations, photographs of Michael's non-compliant landscaping, and a detailed accounting of fees and fines. The evidence was overwhelming, professional, and seemingly irrefutable. Mr. Harrison has shown contempt for community standards and legal authority. Patterson continued. The HOA has no choice but to seek foreclosure to protect the property values and quality of life for law-abiding residents. Patricia took the witness stand with theatrical confidence. Her testimony polished and rehearsed. She painted herself as a dedicated community servant, reluctantly forced to take action against a stubborn neighbor who refused to follow reasonable rules. "I tried to work with Mr. Harrison," Patricia testified, her voice carrying just the right note of regret. "I offered him multiple opportunities to resolve this matter amicably, but he has consistently refused to acknowledge HOA authority or pay his legitimate obligations." Under Patterson's questioning, Patricia detailed Michael's supposed violations with the precision of a military briefing. Each infraction had been photographed, documented, and assigned a specific fine according to each HOA bylaws. "Mrs. Whitmore," Patterson said, "in your professional opinion, has Mr. Harrison shown any willingness to comply with community standards?" "None whatsoever," Patricia replied firmly. "He has made it clear that he considers himself above the rules that everyone else follows." When Sarah Brennan rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted subtly. Patricia's confident expression flickered for just a moment before returning to its practiced calm. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah began quietly, "how long have you been president of the Willow Creek HOA?" "5 years," Patricia replied. "And during that time, how many properties have you brought under HOA jurisdiction through boundary adjustments?" Patricia hesitated. "I don't have exact numbers." "Would it surprise you to learn that it's 37 properties, generating over $2.3 million in fees and penalties Attorney Patterson objected, but Judge Chen allowed the question. Patricia's answer was barely audible. That sounds approximately correct. Sarah approached the witness stand with a manila folder. Mrs. Whitmore, do you recognize this document? Patricia's face went pale as she examined the paper. It was a lease agreement between Harrison Properties, LLC, and the Willow Creek HOA for use of the community clubhouse. Yes, Patricia whispered. And who is the landlord listed on this lease? Harrison Properties, LLC, Mrs. Whitmore. Are you aware that Harrison Properties, LLC is owned by the defendant, Michael Harrison? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Patricia gripped the witness stand, her knuckles white. That's impossible. Sarah smiled coldly. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the complete property records for Harrison Properties, LLC, clearly showing Mr. Harrison as the sole owner and beneficiary. Judge Chen examined the documents with growing interest. Ms. Patterson, were you aware that your client has been paying rent to the defendant? Patterson looked stunned. No, Your Honor. This is the first I'm hearing of this. But Sarah wasn't finished. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd also like you to identify this recording. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah played audio from the clubhouse security system. Patricia's voice filled the room. The Harrison property will be the biggest score yet. Once we force foreclosure, we can flip it to one of our preferred developers for triple what he owes in fees. Patricia's face crumpled. Where did you get that? From the security system in the building you rent from my client, Sarah replied. The building where you've been planning to steal his property. The prosecution continued for another hour as Sarah systematically destroyed Patricia's credibility. Security footage showed Patricia using the clubhouse for unauthorized commercial activities. Financial records revealed kickbacks from developers. Most damning of all, Sarah presented the master list of targeted properties found in Patricia's office. Your Honor, Sarah announced, Mrs. Whitmore hasn't just been enforcing HOA rules. She's been running a criminal enterprise designed to steal homes and resell them for profit. Patricia's attorney tried desperately to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Sarah called Michael to the witness stand, his testimony was simple and devastating. I inherited the clubhouse property from my father, Michael explained. Mrs. Whitmore has been paying me $12,000 per month in rent for 5 years, while simultaneously trying to steal my home. Mr. Harrison, Sarah asked, were you ever properly notified of the boundary changes that supposedly brought your property under HOA jurisdiction? No, I was not. Have you ever agreed to join the Willow Creek HOA? Absolutely not. The final blow came when Sarah presented evidence that the city boundary changes Patricia had relied upon were themselves fraudulent, obtained through bribes to city council members who were regular attendees at Patricia's private clubhouse meetings. Judge Chen called a 30-minute recess, during which Patricia could be seen frantically whispering with her attorneys. When court resumed, her legal team requested permission to withdraw from the case. Your Honor, Patterson announced, given the new evidence presented, we can no longer represent Mrs. Whitmore in this matter. Patricia sat alone at the plaintiff's table, her empire crumbling around her. But the day's surprises weren't over yet. Your Honor, Sarah announced, I have one final piece of evidence to present. She handed Judge Chen a document that made the judge's eyebrows rise significantly. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Chen said, "Are you aware that your lease on the Clubhouse property expired yesterday?" Patricia looked confused. "That's impossible. We have 18 months left on our agreement." "Actually," Michael said, standing up, "the lease contained a clause allowing immediate termination if the tenant engaged in illegal activities on the premises. As of yesterday, your lease is void." The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Patricia's HOA not only had no legal standing to foreclose on Michael's property, but they no longer had a meeting place to conduct any business at all. Judge Chen didn't need long to deliberate. "This court finds no valid basis for the foreclosure action. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the allegations of fraud and conspiracy presented here today." As the gavel fell, Patricia Whitmore's 5-year reign of terror came to an end, but the story was far from over. Patricia stood slowly, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. As she walked toward the exit, she stopped directly in front of Michael. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You have no idea what you've done." Michael looked her in the eye calmly. "Actually, Patricia, I know exactly what I've done. I've stopped a criminal." As Patricia stormed out of the courtroom, Michael felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. He had won the battle. But something in Patricia's parting words suggested the war might not be finished. What Michael didn't know was that Patricia Whitmore had one final card to play, and it would turn everything upside down once again. 3 weeks after the courtroom victory, Michael Harrison thought his nightmare was finally over. The district attorney had launched a full investigation into Patricia's operations. Federal authorities were examining potential mail fraud charges, and Michael had his property free and clear. He was finally able to sleep through the night without worrying about losing his home. That peace shattered at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when FBI agents knocked on his door. "Mr. Harrison." "I'm Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division," the lead agent announced, showing her badge. "We need to ask you some questions about Harrison Properties, LLC and your relationship with Patricia Whitmore." Michael's blood turned to ice. "I don't understand. I'm the victim here, sir. We'd appreciate it if you'd come with us voluntarily. We have some discrepancies in the financial records that we need to discuss." As Michael sat in the sterile interview room at the FBI field office, he began to understand the magnitude of Patricia's final gambit. She hadn't just been running a property theft scheme, she had been carefully building a paper trail that implicated Michael as her partner. Agent Martinez spread documents across the table: bank transfers, email communications, and business records that painted a devastating picture. According to the evidence, Michael hadn't been an unwitting victim of Patricia's scheme. He had been her secret partner, using his inherited properties as the foundation for their criminal enterprise. "Mr. Harrison," Agent Martinez said, "these records show regular payments from Harrison Properties, LLC to offshore accounts controlled by Patricia Whitmore. They also show that you've been receiving a percentage of the profits from forced property sales." Michael stared at the documents in disbelief. The bank transfers were real. but he had never authorized them. The emails appeared to be from his account, but he had never sent them. Somehow, Patricia had been conducting business in his name for years without his knowledge. "This is impossible," Michael protested. "I never agreed to any of this. I didn't even know Patricia existed until she showed up at my door demanding fees." "Mr. Harrison, your father's business manager was Patricia's husband, David Whitmore. According to these records, the partnership between the Whitmores and Harrison Properties dates back 15 years. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. His father's business manager, the man who had handled all the property transactions and rental agreements, was married to Patricia. Everything Michael thought he knew about his inheritance was a lie. Agent Martinez continued her interrogation with methodical precision. "David Whitmore has been managing Harrison Properties since your father's death. Patricia has power of attorney to conduct business on behalf of the company, legally. She's been acting as your authorized representative." Michael's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. His father's mysterious wealth, the properties he'd inherited, the rental income he'd been receiving, it had all been part of a sophisticated real estate fraud scheme. Patricia hadn't been trying to steal his property. She had been trying to prevent him from discovering that his entire inheritance was built on stolen homes. "I want a lawyer," Michael said quietly. But Agent Martinez wasn't finished. "There's something else, Mr. Harrison. We've traced the ownership of Harrison Properties back to its founding. Your father didn't build a real estate empire through legitimate investments. He was the original architect of the horror fraud scheme." Patricia has been continuing his work. The FBI had uncovered a conspiracy that spanned to decades. Robert Harrison had developed the strategy of using HOA authority to seize properties, then selling them through his shell companies for enormous profits. When he died, David and Patricia Whitmore had inherited both the business model and the legal authority to continue the operation. That Michael had never been a victim. He had been an unwilling heir to a criminal empire. Sarah Brannon arrived at the FBI office 3 hours after Michael's arrest, her face grim with the weight of new revelations. "Michael, we need to talk. The situation is far worse than I thought, sir. I swear I didn't know any of this. I thought Patricia was trying to steal my property. Not that my property was already stolen." "I believe you," Sarah said. "But believing you and proving your innocence are two different things. Patricia has been very thorough in documenting your supposed involvement. The case that followed was unlike anything the county had ever seen. Patricia, facing decades in federal prison, had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Michael. Her story was compelling. Michael had discovered his father's criminal operation after inheriting the properties and had demanded to be made a full partner. When she refused, he had tried to destroy her operation and frame her for crimes he had committed. The evidence Patricia presented was sophisticated and damning. Forged documents showing Michael's involvement in property seizures dating back years before their supposed first meeting. Financial records indicating he had been receiving profits from the scheme since inheriting the properties, even recorded phone conversations that appeared to show Michael discussing the criminal operation. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake in her desperation to frame Michael. She had been too thorough. Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized that the recorded phone conversations allegedly between Michael and Patricia contained background audio from the Willow Creek Club. HOA, the security system Michael's father had installed, captured not just video, but high-quality audio from every room in the building. Patricia has been doctoring evidence using the Clubhouse recording equipment. Sarah explained to Michael during a jail visit. She could record herself having both sides of conversations, then edit them to make it sound like you were responding to her. But she forgot that the security system timestamps every recording. The forensic audio analysis took weeks, but the results were conclusive. Patricia had created hours of fabricated conversations by splicing together audio clips and using voice modification software. The timestamps proved that many of the supposed phone calls had actually been recorded in empty rooms at the clubhouse. More damning still, the security footage showed Patricia in the process of creating the false evidence, sitting alone in the conference room and recording multiple voices for her elaborate deception. The final trial was held 6 months after Michael's arrest. Patricia, facing additional charges for evidence tampering and perjury, had run out of legal options. Her plea deal was revoked, and she found herself fighting for her freedom alongside her husband David, who had been arrested for his role in managing the criminal enterprise. As Patricia took the witness stand for what would be the last time, Michael saw a broken woman who had lost everything in her quest for control and wealth. The confident HOA president who had once threatened to take his home was gone, replaced by someone facing life in federal prison. Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah asked during cross-examination, "Why did you target Michael Harrison specifically?" Patricia's answer was barely audible. "Because he was the only one who could expose the truth about his father's operation. I thought if I could force him out or frame him, the secret would die with him. But Michael was innocent of his father's crimes." Patricia broke down completely. "Yes, he never knew anything about the business. I fabricated everything to protect myself." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Patricia Whitmore was convicted on 17 federal charges, including racketeering, mail fraud, and evidence tampering. David Whitmore received 15 years for his role as business manager of the criminal operation. But the story's final twist came during Patricia's sentencing hearing, when Michael stood to address the court. "Your Honor," Michael began, "Patricia Whitmore tried to destroy my life to cover up crimes I never committed. But in doing so, she exposed a criminal operation that had stolen 37 homes from innocent families over 2 decades. Michael turned to look directly at Patricia. "You thought you could frame me for your crimes, but instead, you gave me the evidence I needed to return every stolen property to its rightful owners." The Harrison Properties portfolio, built on fraud and theft, was liquidated under FBI supervision. Every property was returned to its original owners or their heirs, with full compensation for damages. The victims of the scheme, people who had lost their homes to fabricated HOA fees and fraudulent foreclosures, finally received justice. Michael kept only his original property, the modest house on 2 acres that had started this entire ordeal. The Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, now free from Patricia's criminal enterprise, was donated to the county for use as a community center. As Michael stood on his porch 6 months later, looking out at the lake that had drawn him to the property, originally, he reflected on the strange journey that had transformed him from a quiet retiree into the unlikely hero who had exposed a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on him. Patricia's attempt to force him into her HOA had ultimately destroyed the very organization she had spent years building. Her greed and desperation had led to her own downfall, while the man she tried to victimize had emerged as the instrument of justice for dozens of families. But perhaps the strangest twist of all was yet to come. A week later, Michael received a letter from the new, legitimate Willow Creek Homeowners Association, the community group that had formed after Patricia's criminal enterprise was dismantled. They were inviting him to join voluntarily, with no fees, no penalties, and no demands for compliance. The letter was signed by 37 residents, all of whom were families whose homes had been returned through Michael's unwitting inheritance of evidence. Michael smiled as he filed the letter away without responding. After everything he'd been through, he had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully is simply to let them destroy themselves. The Willow Creek scandal became a landmark case in federal white-collar crime prosecution, leading to new laws governing HOA authority and property transfers. Patricia Whitmore was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, where she had plenty of time to contemplate the consequences of her greed. And Michael Harrison finally got what he had always wanted: peace, quiet, and the freedom to live his life without anyone telling him how to maintain his mailbox. The clubhouse sat empty now, its windows dark and its doors locked. But sometimes, late at night, neighbors swore they could still hear the echo of Patricia's voice drifting across the lake, a ghostly reminder that in the war between justice and greed, justice always finds a way to prevail. 1 year later, Michael received an unexpected phone call that would add one final chapter to his story. The caller identified himself as James Patterson, Patricia's former attorney's younger brother, and what he had to say would change everything Michael thought he knew about his father's legacy. "Mr. Harrison," James said nervously, "I worked as a paralegal in my sister's firm during your case. There's something about your father that Patricia never told you, something she couldn't tell you, because it would have destroyed her entire defense." Michael agreed to meet James at a coffee shop downtown, curious about what new revelation could possibly emerge from the ashes of the Whitmore scandal. James arrived carrying a weathered briefcase that had belonged to Patricia's legal files. "Patricia wasn't just continuing your father's criminal operation," he began quietly. "She was covering up the fact that your father had turned state's evidence against his own partner's 20 years egg." Oh, the documents James produced told an incredible story. Robert Harrison hadn't been the architect of the HOA fraud scheme. He had been recruited into it by a larger criminal organization that was stealing properties across multiple states. When he discovered the true scope of the operation, he had become an FBI informant. "Your father spent the last 15 years of his life helping the FBI build cases against property fraud rings nationwide," James explained. "The properties you inherited weren't stolen, they were seized assets that your father was managing as part of his cooperation agreement Michael stared at the FBI cooperation documents. His father's signature clearly visible on pages of testimony that had helped convict dozens of criminals. The man he had barely known had been a hero, not a villain. Patricia knew all of this, Michael asked. She discovered it when she was preparing her defense, James replied. But she couldn't use it in court because it would have proven your innocence completely. Instead, she decided to frame you for crimes your father had actually been fighting against. The final irony was devastating in its completeness. Patricia Whitmore, in her desperate attempt to destroy Michael Harrison, had unknowingly continued her husband's unwitting partnership with the son of the FBI informant who had originally brought down their criminal empire. Michael's father hadn't left him a criminal inheritance, he had left him the tools to complete the work of justice he had started decades earlier. As Michael drove home that evening, he passed the former Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, now bustling with legitimate community activities. Children played on the lawn where Patricia had once plotted her schemes, and families gathered for the kind of wholesome events the HOA letters were supposed to support. He thought about his father, a man he had never understood, but who had apparently spent his final years atoning for his early mistakes. The properties, the rental income, even the security system that had ultimately exposed Patricia's crimes, all of it had been part of a larger plan to make things right. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Brennan. Michael, you need to see the news. The FBI just announced that evidence from the Whitmore case has led to the arrests of 73 people in a nationwide property fraud ring. Your father's work is finally complete. Michael smiled as he pulled into his driveway, looking up at the modest house that had started this incredible journey. Sometimes justice took 20 years to arrive, but when it finally came, it was worth the wait. The war between the quiet software engineer and the power-hungry HOA president had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the revelation that they had both been pawns in a much larger game, a game that Michael's father had been winning long before either of them knew they were playing. And in the end, the greatest twist of all was that Michael Harrison hadn't just inherited his father's properties. He had inherited his father's mission to make sure that no family would ever lose their home to the kind of criminals who preyed on American communities. The Willow Creek scandal was over, but Michael's real work was just beginning. After all, there were still 36 other communities where Patricia's methods had been replicated, and now Michael had both the resources and the motivation to make sure justice was served. Patricia Whitmore had tried to force him into her criminal empire, never realizing that she was actually forcing him to complete his father's mission of destroying it. The last laugh, as it turned out, belonged to the Harrisons, both father and son. And this 4-part legal thriller demonstrates how sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting our enemies, but from allowing them to defeat themselves through their own greed and desperation. In the battle between justice and corruption, patience and truth will always triumph over power and deceit.